So I mentioned that we're going to connect you with well-known international ELT experts, and I was delighted when I was asked to moderate this discussion with a true ELT expert, Penny Ure. Penny Ure is the winner of the Outstanding Achievement Award by the British Council at the Elton Awards in 2022. Penny has 35 years experience as an English teacher in elementary, middle and high schools in Israel. Now retired, she has taught BA and MA courses at Oranim Academic College of Education and Haifa University. She has lectured and published extensively on topics connected to the theory and practice of effective language teaching. She was, for 10 years, the series editor of the Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers series. And her books include, and I'm sure a lot of you have used her books, I know I have, her books include grammar practice activities, vocabulary activities, a course in English language teaching, discussions, and many more, all published by Cambridge University Press. And in 2013, Penny received a very high distinction, which is an OBE, Order of the British Empire, by Queen Elizabeth II for her work as an English language teacher. So I hope you all join me in welcoming Penny to give us this fascinating talk today on teacher agency.
Okay, so my topic today is teacher agency, doing our own thing, and it's very appropriate to Teachers Day, which is the day today. So teacher agency is not immediately a very familiar concept. So let's start off by defining it. What is teacher agency? Here's an academic definition. So I'm not going to read aloud. You can read it yourselves, but it's a bit long-winded and a bit wordy, as is typical of many academic definitions I've read. So let's take this definition and make it a little bit more accessible. Teacher agency then is basically, as the subtitle of this session has it, doing our own thing. It means the right and ability to take and implement key decisions relating to our own teaching. It implies power, professional power, independence, and a degree of autonomy. It's a key aspect of professionalism, and not only teachers and professionals, of course. What I'm going to say applies also to doctors, to lawyers, medics, social workers, counselors, psychiatrists, and many more. People whose profession involves making a difference in real time in the real world to other people. The teacher then as a professional, I'm going to spend a little time talking about this concept of professional. What's a professional? Some years ago, I wrote an article about this because it really fascinates me, the whole concept of what is a professional. And I compared to a professional versus lay, someone who is completely outside the area, professional versus amateur, someone who is not actually earning money doing it and has not studied and become an expert, professional versus technician, which I'll come back to in a moment, and professional versus academic. Academic is something quite different. They're all interesting. And if you're interested in looking up the reference, I've got a complete bibliography at the end of this. So to come back then to the key distinction I want to talk about here, which is professional versus technician. The teacher on the one hand versus the carpenter on the other. A professional versus a technician. And the difference is the technician basically do what they're told. The technician does what they're told, has a repertoire of practical techniques, is an expert in his or her particular area, but obeys preset guidelines as to how to use these techniques. Whereas the professional does not just do what he or she is told, but has a knowledge of both theory and practical techniques, theory and practice. It's not just theory and it's not just principle, but also a repertoire of practical techniques, understands the connection between theory and practice, and makes choices and decisions regarding his or her actions. It's not as black and white a distinction as perhaps this involves. There is, of course, it's a continuum. There's some occupations which are more or less professional, which are more or less technician. And it's also true to say that teaching can, in some cases, I hope that we are professionals, but in some cases, a teacher can also be a technician. Unfortunately, there are those who come into the classroom, do teach the way they are taught, go through set routines, go home, take their pay packet, and that's it. And that is not what I would call a professional teacher. A professional teacher is developing all the time and does not just teach the way they were taught. There is an interesting distinction if we're talking about, say, an experienced teacher. A teacher who has been teaching for 30 years, a professional teacher then has 30 years of accumulated experience and reflection and expertise. A technician who has been teaching for 30 years has simply 1 year of experience repeated 30 times. They are not developing, they're not professionals. So there is this possibility of a teacher being one or the other. If you are in this session, then you are all, by definition, already yourselves professionals. I'm speaking to an audience of professionals because a technician wouldn't bother to come to a webinar like this one, whereas professional teachers take any opportunity they can to increase expertise by attending sessions such as this one. To move on then, I want to home in on this aspect of expertise. The expertise which I described as being accumulated over years of experience, reflection, learning. Expertise, and I'm going now to the literature, the research literature on expertise, is defined as, first of all, effective automatized routines. An expert has a whole arsenal, if you like, a collection of automatized routines, like getting students into groups or beginning lessons or ending lessons or correcting essays, which they have automized and which they do very quickly and automatically, thus freeing up time and attention to innovate and to take decisions about creative parts of teaching. So the second, after the automatized routines, the second component of expertise is the ability to make thoughtful decisions. And the third is continual development. The expert is someone who's continually learning, continually developing, however old you are and however many years you've been teaching, continuing to learn and get better at what you do. And the reference, again, as I said, I'll give at the end of this session. The importance of expertise is that it provides the expert with an authority. I'm an expert and therefore I can claim to some degree of authority. I have respect. I expect people to respect me because I have the expertise in my particular area. I am autonomous. We're coming now to I'm not putting up what I'm saying. Autonomy, and finally, agency. Enhanced agency, the enhanced ability to take my own decision, the right to take my own decisions with regard to my own professional practice. How do we increase expertise? Through, obviously, experience and reflection, I already mentioned that, but also learning from a variety of sources, reading, conferences, discussion with colleagues, your students, whatever. But from this range of sources, one of the characteristics of an autonomous expert with agency is that they have the right to select from what they learn, what they don't learn, the right to reject if something which they are taught it doesn't seem to make sense, and the right to adapt also what they are learning from. I'll be every now and again stopping to have an interim summary. Here's my first one, interim summary one then. Teacher agency, I said I'd start off with a definition, is rooted in teacher professionalism, and I defined what is a professional as distinct from a technician. Expertise, the teacher is an expert. It is rooted in continued professional learning and in the right to have critical evaluation of any input I come across. I'm going to stop for a second and say, please feel free to write in the chat box. I'm keeping my eye on the chat box here. Any questions or comments? If there's anything I've said which is not clear or which you'd like to add something yourself, please feel free to add. Meanwhile, Sarah's keeping an eye on the question Q&A box. And if there are any questions, I'll come to them at the end. But that doesn't stop you from putting in comments or questions as we go. As I say, I'm keeping an eye on the chat box. Okay, so I've defined what teacher agency is, and I want to just talk about limitations. There are limitations on teacher agency. We can't just do whatever we want. We can't take decisions about everything. And I want to make a distinction between what I see as acceptable constraints and unacceptable constraints on teacher autonomy, teacher agency. First of all, I think it is acceptable for a teacher to be limited by the syllabus of their institution, the syllabus of the Ministry of Education. In my case, the Ministry of Education in my country has a very clear curriculum, which is binding on all teachers. And I think that's acceptable. And I can exercise my teacher agency within that. The second constraint, which I think is acceptable, is materials. Again, within a national situation, and indeed within some private institutions, there are certain textbooks or materials which are available, which you're expected to use, and that's fine, with some reservations I'll come to in a moment. And the third constraint is very often our students are going towards some high stakes exams like IELTS, for example. And that also is, I would say, an acceptable constraint on teacher agency. So working within these constraints, I would say that's okay. There are, however, constraints which I see as unacceptable. And I have to say that, to make the point at this point, that I am saying my own opinion here, and others, people equally expert as myself, may not agree. So please accept this as Penny's view on constraints on teacher agency, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. The constraints which I see as unacceptable are imposition of an exclusive approach. You can do this, you can't do this, which would imply prohibition of certain teaching strategies. For example, you're not allowed to use the student's mother tongue at all. There are some situations where this is totally taboo, and teachers, I've even heard of one situation where a teacher is in danger of losing her job if she uses the student's L1. And I think this is an unacceptable constraint. I think the teacher should be able to decide whether and how much she uses L1, for example. Limitation to coursebook material. Again, I heard of a situation, I'm not going to say exactly where, a situation where the teacher may only teach lessons based on the coursebook, may not use non-coursebook material. Again, I think this is unacceptable. I think a teacher should be able, certainly, to use the coursebook, but to vary from it and to add his or her own material if she sees it relevant. And I'll give some examples later. A fourth unacceptable constraint is compulsory content on timing of lessons. If an authority says Thursday at 5 p.m. The lesson has to consist of this, this, and this. Again, this is, in my view, against and limiting a teacher's autonomy, and in my view, unacceptable. So, interim summary 2, teacher agency can be exercised within the limitations of a given syllabus, set book or set textbook or upcoming exams, but it is severely limited if you are limited to a particular methodology, if you have to teach all and only the textbook, and if lessons are pre-planned by an authority. Okay, any comments? I'm just glancing here at the chat box, but it's mostly problems with viewing. Okay, nothing about the content of this session. I assume that, I hope that means that it's reasonably clear. Could you please, in the chat box, put in a comment to say if I'm going at an acceptable pace, if it's making sense, and if you're following as planned. Okay, let's move on. So my next heading is teacher agency in practice, the lesson. The classroom is an intensely private place. A teacher and students only. Normally, it's very rare. It happens, but it's relatively rare for there to be an invasion by an observer or an assessor or a visitor of any kind. Normally, 99 times out of 100, it's just the teacher and the students. It's an intimate community, and the teacher therefore determines the content of the lesson, or should, this is my view of teacher agency, right? The lesson content, the order in which I do the content of the lesson, degree and nature of student participation, how much I'm going to activate the students, how much I'm going to dictate the content myself, and how I manage classroom process. Okay, Dana makes a very, very interesting point here. I won't read it out, I'm just reading it, but worth looking at. Yes, unfortunately, you're absolutely right. This is in a lot of educational systems, the teachers are seen as technicians, slaves, servants, obedient instructors who do what they are told. And I'm trying to put here the point of view that teachers should be given more say, or should be given a substantial say in what happens. In this case, I'm talking about lesson content. Let's move on to the next point of teacher autonomy and teacher agency, where I think it is really important for the teacher to decide which kind of methodology they're going to use. And there's lots of options here. We all know about all these options, and they're used differently in different places, whether to use communicative tasks or explicit explanations of vocabulary pronunciation, whether you're going to use language-focused exercise, whether or not you're going to use group work, pair work, and how much, the students L1, how much, if at all, how much teacher talk, and so on and so on. All these are the kinds of things which the teacher has to decide. I'm not going to say here it is right to have a lot of teacher talk, it's wrong to have a lot of teacher talk. That's not my point. My point is that the teacher decides whether and how in his or her particular context this is right and appropriate. We may and should take into account, of course, the syllabus, materials. We have our own students' preferences. Our own preferences. This is an item, the fourth item here, our own preferences, something that you don't read about a lot, but I think what I, as a teacher, happen to prefer, what I feel comfortable with, what suits my own teaching style, is also important, is as important as learning styles. And then there's the local culture of learning, what my population of students is used to doing and what they feel works for them. The culture, as it were, of learning and teaching in my particular society. And of course, the research and professional literature I need to take into account what I've learned from that. But bottom line, the methodological decisions are ours. And the next question which comes out of this is, does this mean there's no one best language teaching methodology? And I don't think this is true. I think there is such a thing as a best, but it is for a particular teaching context. There is not a best methodology worldwide for everybody. No such animal, in my view. There is a best methodology for a particular teaching context, in a particular place, with a particular group of students, a particular teacher. Prabhu, in 1990, wrote an article about there is no best method. Why? And he came up with the idea of teacher plausibility. What the teacher feels is right, good, works, brings about the best learning outcomes for my student population in my situation. It makes sense to me. It is plausible, teacher plausibility. So this doesn't mean that anything goes. There are principles and procedures in general that in principle are likely to produce good learning outcomes. You can read about them and learn about them in courses, professional literature, through the research or conferences, by talking to colleagues and from your students. In general, let's say, for example, activating students in the classroom is likely to lead to better learning than having them passive throughout the class. These sorts of things are likely to produce good learning. There are lots of other ideas also that you can read about. But from this pool of recommended principles and procedures, I choose what works for me. You choose what works for you. Taking into account our own experience, knowledge, professional judgment, our students' needs and expectations, the local culture of learning I've already mentioned, the local syllabus and materials, local stakeholders, the parents of our students if we're teaching in schools, or the employers of our students if we're teaching in the business, and so on. The third way teacher agency in practice works, I've talked about the lesson, I've talked about methodology. My third item is materials adaptation. The coursebook is a valuable tool. And teacher agency does not mean discarding the text, the coursebook. I mean, there are some people who think you should throw out the textbook and do your own thing completely. I don't agree with that. I think the coursebook is very useful. And teacher agency does not mean discarding the coursebook, but it does mean using the coursebook critically and creatively to suit our needs, selecting, omitting, adding, and changing. Question from Sari Atsumi. What if the teacher is limited with time? Do you have to finish the material? Which one would you have at the moment until you, sorry, I can't understand this, until your students understand, or just rush with the material? I've already said that having to do a particular coursebook, I think is an unacceptable limitation. If you have to go through every single item in the coursebook and finish it within a certain time, there's no way you can exercise your own decisions as to what to focus on and how to create your own methodology and lessons, which is why it is so difficult when you are in the situation which Sari suggests here. I would say skip bits of the coursebook and do what you feel will bring about the best learning for your students. But I'm not in your situation, and who am I to dictate what to do? Very, very difficult question. We'll perhaps come back to this, and perhaps other people can contribute an answer to Sari when we have the discussion at the end of this session. To come back to the coursebook, I don't think it should discard. I think the point is using the coursebook critically and creatively to suit our needs, selecting, omitting, adding, and changing. Let's start with adding. We might want to add to the textbook. very difficult in Surrey's situation where she's racing to fill the textbook, to finish the textbook. But supposing the textbook doesn't have enough, for example, vocabulary work, you want to add more vocabulary. Or you want to add a text which you like, which you composed yourself or found on the internet, or an activity or task or a repeat or variation of an exercise. We might want to omit, to delete bits of the textbook. And again, those of you who are in a situation you would have to do the whole textbook, you have a problem here. And I think this is a serious problem with teacher agency if you're not allowed to omit anything. I, in my own textbooks, omit all over the place. I omit because it might be boring, or it's inappropriate for my particular class, or it's overkill, it's doing too much of something, or it's too difficult, or indeed too easy, or it's too long, or just because I don't have time for it, or because I don't like it, or my students don't like it. All sorts of reasons. I will exercise my teacher agency and my right to omit bits of the textbook which I feel are inappropriate. I might change. Coursebook is not a rigid set of laws. The teacher has the right to alter instructions or text. Let me give you an example here. Here's an exercise. Just have a look at that. It looks like a fairly sort of rigid kind of exercise. But what I'm suggesting is, if we have this question answer kind of exercise, what might we do to exercise our teacher agency in the way we administer this exercise? Okay, I want to practice questions. That's my aim here. How might I do it? So, okay, any ideas about what you might do here? What might you do other than what it says in the textbook? Okay, Matthew, thank you for this. Selecting, omitting, adding, changing, SAC. Very nice. I haven't come across that acronym, and it's a really nice one. Thank you for that. Well, you carry on thinking of things you might do in this exercise, and I'll tell you what I might do, and you can add. So first of all, simply say rather than write. Don't have to write it. Ignore the questions, just look at the answers and suggest questions. And then it's open to them to think about what the questions might be. The first one is sort of fairly obvious, perhaps. But the second one, all sorts of questions could result in the answer Mexico. And there are various things which could lead to the answer it's Rita, or no, I'm a doctor, or 16. So make up your own questions, gives much richer and more original and fun practice in questions. Ignore the answers, just look at the questions and write answers true for you, personalizing the exercise. Rewrite the questions, adding an extra word or phrase. How are you today? How are you after you've recovered from COVID? How are you? And so on. I just had COVID last week myself, so this is relevant to me. And so on. So doing all sorts of things with an exercise, not just leaving it as it is on the page. This is part of teacher agency. Interim summary 3 then. Teacher agency may be expressed in practice through planning lesson content and order, choice of methodology, and adaptation of coursebook material. Enhancing teacher agency is my next heading. First of all, enhancing teacher agency is mainly individual teacher development, and this is the theme of this conference as well, one of the themes, through experience and reflection, through action research, through writing and presenting. I did a lot of my own teacher development at an earlier stage simply by writing down what I was thinking and sharing with other people, presenting in courses and conferences, reading, of course, attending courses and conferences and hearing what other people have to say, and sharing. Sharing is a key thing. Teaching is a very solitary occupation. You can find yourself in a situation, particularly if you're a teacher in elementary school, where very often you're the only English teacher there, very, very difficult to find someone to share with. But in most schools or most institutions, there are other English teachers who you can share with in teachers' meetings mainly, to share ideas, support and encourage each other, particularly for teachers having a problem, a place where they can come and share with other teachers and get support and suggestions, to promote solidarity and to encourage, again, agency within the local institution. Teachers' meetings are a really important forum within an institution for promoting agency. Sharing too within local teachers' associations. The two symbols you can see there are, on the right, ETI, which is English Teachers Association in Israel, in my own home association, where I grew up, as it were, as a teacher and learned a lot of my professional knowledge. And the one on the left is API, which is the Portuguese equivalent, also a vibrant, active teachers association. And they have similar aims through conferences, websites, special interest groups, publications, blogs, online, all sorts of things. And many of your countries have local teachers organizations which do these sorts of things. And then there are the big international conferences like IATEFL and TESOL, where you can hear about practical theoretical innovations, research, and you can network with teachers from all over the world. So interim summary 3, here we go. Teacher agency will be enhanced when individual teachers constantly strive to develop their expertise, what's known as ongoing professional development, through reading, through discussion, through sharing, and regularly network at local, national, and international levels. Okay, I'm getting to my conclusion now. Just want to recap what I've been trying to say, and I hope it's been clear. Teacher agency means taking decisions regarding professional practice and acting on them, in lesson planning, choice of methodology, use of materials. It is enhanced if teachers increase their expertise and get together to share, plan, and take decisions. It doesn't stop there. Teacher agency may lead to actually influencing the whole area of English language teaching worldwide. If the teachers have a voice, if they exercise their agency, this may lead to empowerment of teachers as a group, as a team, as a set of professionals to support changes in their own institution, in the curriculum, in materials design, in assessment procedures, teacher job descriptions, and more. Teacher job descriptions, for example, a teacher's job description very often today, unfortunately, only includes teaching lessons and going home. Teaching lessons, checking homework, marking papers and so on, and going home. Teacher job descriptions very often does not include time for professional development, time for reading, time for research, time for attending conferences or events just like this. And it is part of the job of us teachers to make sure that teachers' job descriptions and the function, the profession of a teacher includes not only teaching a lesson and going home, but also professional development, reading, attending conferences, and attending events such as this one. And I'm going to finish off with a postscript. Teacher agency in this talk. I've said that teacher agency means the right to decide, the right to accept, the right to reject, and includes this talk. In other words, including everything I've said in this talk is over to you now. Over to you. You have agency. You have the right to say, I agree with Penny about this. I don't agree with Penny about that. I reject this. I accept this. I adapt that. And this is all part of teacher agency, and it applies to this talk as it applies to any other aspect of professionalism. Here are the references I promised you.
We're perfect for time, thank you. And you've taught me something today, the joy of an interim summary, which is something I would definitely take forward with me in the future because I found it incredibly helpful. We've got a few questions in the chat, not in the Q&A because of the Facebook questions, but one question, oh, it suddenly disappeared from my screen, which is making life difficult. One question was about teacher. Sorry, my screen's just completely changed all around.
I took off my share screen, Sarah. Is that what did it?
It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Oh, I've got it. So Jessie Jane from Facebook said, how can teacher agency be applied in a teaching curriculum which imposes a no student retention policy? What if a student needs to be retained because the teacher believes that the student is not yet ready to move to another level? So when Jessie says retention, I think she's referring to not being able to keep students behind if they need to stay behind.
Yes. Again, I would include this as one of the aspects of limitations of teacher agency, which sometimes we have to work within. And I don't really have a good answer to this one. Try to change the policy of your school to allow you to retain students if you want to. It's a really difficult problem.
Yeah.
No, I can't offer an answer to that one. Sorry.
For sure. And those policy questions are ones that, as you said, you just have to work with and not necessarily against. Nalida Gabby from Facebook said, once a teacher told me that there's no need to prepare a lesson plan because everything is already planned in the textbook. What would you tell him?
I think he's wrong. I think well, that advice is wrong. We do need to prepare, and the textbook is a tool, not a master. It's not that
Absolutely.
we just go through the textbook bit by bit, lesson by lesson, according to what's written. The textbook is a very valuable help to teaching, but it is just that, is a help and a servant, not a master. So yes, I always prepare my lessons. In fact, I always write out my lesson plans before I do a lesson, and I will use part of the textbook that fits in with my teaching plan. I will use the textbook even to help me structure my course and decide what I'm going to do first, what I'm going to do next. It's very, very helpful, but it is not a substitute for my own planning.
I completely agree with you. And I used to work for a publisher, so I spoke to a lot of teachers who use the textbook, as you describe, as a tool to change when they needed to yes. form part of their toolbox. Winbone Ong from Facebook has asked a question. I'm going to rephrase it slightly. That says, do you think that a course book can help children use language in real life? I think that's what the question means.
Yes, I think it can if it's used properly, but a course book needs to be mediated by the teacher. Mm-hmm. And the teacher will use the texts and the activities and the exercises in the textbook to help the learners use English in real life. The textbook cannot in itself instruct. It's the teacher who instructs using the textbook. I hope that's clear.
So while people are looking at that,
while they're looking at that, please carry on with the questions.
There's an excellent question from Simon Williams from Facebook. I love this question. To what degree do you think teacher agency should be shaped by student agency? The classroom as a private space is the space of the students as well as the teacher. Should it be a co-agency between all in that closed community?
Lovely question, as you say. Yes. Next time I participate in this conference, I have a session on student learner agency. Please invite me to give a talk on that. I totally agree that it is complementary to and a part of teacher agency. A teacher who is aware of his or her own right to decide on things relating to his or her own professional practice is aware also that the learners have a similar right. In other words, they need to be able to decide in certain circumstances how they learn, where they learn, in what order they do things, and so on. And I think that the two aspects of agency, teacher agency and learner agency, are complementary and equally important. And I'd be happy to enlarge this if the person who asked the question writes me an email, I will answer them at more length on this topic. I think it's an extremely important one. Thank you.
Absolutely, learner agency is really important. But moving back to the questions, we have got a question from John Paul Matera, which is the age-old question for lots of teachers, I suppose. If you have a lot of students in the class, how can you make sure that everybody participates if you only have a little bit of discussion time?
I'd be interested to know what you call a lot of students, John Paul Matera. Do you call it 20? Do you call it 30? Do you call it 50? Do you call it 100? Sarah, in your experience in India, for example, what is a large class?
I haven't taught in India, but there are classes I've heard of classes of 200, but like John, I've taught maximum of 30, 35 students.
Yeah. Again, this is a topic for an entire hour's session, but very, very briefly. First of all, if you have a lot of students in the class, it's almost impossible for everyone to participate. What I would try to do is try to ensure that as many as possible participate. And the only way you can do this is by dividing them into groups and letting them to discuss in groups. And then teachers say to me, oh yes, but then they'll start speaking mother tongue, they won't speak English. And my answer is make the task so that it is easily done in English. Appoint perhaps a monitor in each group to check that they keep to English. And remember that if you decide, if you have a class of 30 and you divide them into 6 groups of 5, you're still going to get 6 times as much talk. So even if half the time they spend speaking mother tongue, they're still going to get 3 times as much English as they would in a whole class forum. And it is very often worth dividing them into groups, even if they're not speaking English all the time. Okay, that's sort of in 1 minute. That's an answer to a question which would take a whole hour to discuss.
It was a good answer, and you know, they might be speaking in the mother tongue to explain concepts to each other and actually furthering the learning as well. There's a similar question from Riri Tree Perker on Facebook. How do you make students be confident enough, brave enough to speak English in the class? Again, another persistent issue.
It's a key question, and all of us teachers have encountered problems with this during a career. I think it's absolutely crucial. And yes, I have lots of ideas, but again, in 2 minutes, there's no way I can share all of them. I can refer you perhaps to a book. The first book I ever wrote, actually, was about exactly this problem, because it was the first one which occupied me as it occupies you. How can I get students who are reluctant to speak, to talk in English in the classroom when it's not their native language? Essentially, I've already talked about group work, pair work, but also making sure that the task you give them to do, what you ask them to say and speak, is well within their ability. So it's based on bits of things they know by heart and just have to elaborate a little bit, or based on simple guessing games or simple brainstorming, simple tasks which are easy, clearly success oriented. They can clearly succeed in doing them. But again, I'm sort of speaking trying to summarize in a couple of sentences what would take up a whole session to talk about. Yeah, that's all I can do.
No,
I totally agree with the question, and
it's a
I
really
can do in this time.
No, it was a good answer, and I think we all also have to empathize with what lots of people do have foreign language anxiety, and it is a thing and really hard for people to overcome that. But as you said, structuring the class, creating a safe space, and using those activities,
particularly with younger learners, incidentally, declaiming things they've learned by heart, dialogues, chants, and that sort of thing is really, really helpful. So if you have a younger classes, that's a really good good technique.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions, so I'm going to go with a really interesting one from Christine. I had an ESL student with no English proficiency, and I used mother tongue to give directions and translate some simple vocabulary. However, the school management reprimanded me for doing so. I would like advice on how to explain the situation to them because my previous attempts were unsuccessful. Yeah,
you are right, and your school management is wrong, in my view, anyway.
Yes.
I think you absolutely, in the situation you describe, you have to use mother tongue. I think one thing which can help you is if you tell the school management that there is actually substantial research showing that use of mother tongue in this sort of situation is very conducive to learning. It's very helpful and supportive. And if you want me to send you references to the relevant research, please write to me and I'll send it to you, and try to convince them, because you're right.
And I'm at a conference on multilingualism, and this same theme has come up again and again and again, that students learn another language better through their mother tongue often. So it's really important that people understand some of the issues here. And then there's a question from the Facebook from somebody who teaches in the Philippines, but I think this is a global issue. Would you consider administrative work for a teacher as an unacceptable constraint? How can we solve this problem? It's rampant in the Philippines, where sometimes all the teacher does is non-teaching work.
It depends how much. I mean, in some administrative work, like keeping account of keeping track of grades and registration and attendance, I think is inevitable. There comes a point where it starts taking over from your actual teaching work, and then it becomes unacceptable. So it's a question really of degree and proportion rather than an absolute answer here. Some administrative work is inevitable. If it becomes so much that it actually takes over from your pedagogical role, then yes, it's unacceptable.
You've just got a whole raft of thumbs up and hearts. They're still coming through for that response. So I feel like the administrative burden on teachers is well acknowledged. So let's go to the last question from Une Rosalind on Facebook. I'll try and, in countries where English is not used as a mother tongue, so a lot of the world, course books may not be very helpful in improving English skills in real life. For this reason, activities such as show and tell, essay, or English day are needed. What do you think about this, Penny?
Yes, I agree. I think that's great to do non-coursework things. English days are wonderful. I used to do them all the time when I was teaching elementary school. A day when the students role play or go from place to place to play games or do plays or sketches for the parents or for other classes. All sorts of projects such as the ones you suggest are really, really important and good as a substitute to the textbook. I don't think they can take the place of the textbook, but they are essential as a supplement and to get the students to use English to have fun and say what they think and do things and communicate things, as it were, in real life. So yes, I think this is a really good point that you've made there.